Hey everyone, we have an important patch update today because 13.7 is going to be the patch that the Tacticians Cup is going to be played on. That's also called the World Championships if you want to hear a more simplified version of what that tournament represents. But right now we've had some adjustments to pretty much the S and A tiers. I bumped one B tier comp up as well. But starting in the S tier, we have Heimerdinger, Corki, Flex. I think that line is just very flexible. There are a lot of different options, and you could pretty much play some version of this comp like almost every game. Maybe not like 20 out of 20 games, but at least like 10 out of 20, 15 out of 20, things like that. Emissary Sorcerer Swain, I personally really like this comp a lot as well. Getting Swain 3 is difficult, but once you do get it, it's going to be almost unstoppable unless someone gets some crazy legendary board or hits something even nuttier. After that, Quickstriker reroll, always a great option if you get good artifact items. Blackrose Flex. This comp got a lot better because they got the added option of Elise carry in the backline. I don't think it's anything like that good or anything, but you'd be surprised, and it does have room in the meta because again, it is a flex comp, so you use whatever units you hit. After that, we have Emissary Ambessa Corki, solid option there if you get emissaries early. This is like a pretty high roll comp, pretty high econ comp at that. Also makes great use of a lot of different items. And then lastly, in the S tier, we have Sorcerer Zoe. I think like right now, the patch is like unironically pretty balanced. Riot did a pretty good job. Normally around this point in the set, it is generally pretty equal unless something weird happens, but they B patch that normally. I don't think there's gonna be a B patch. I think this is gonna be pretty stable because both the S and the A tiers, like they all have times to go for them, you know? Like if you get a great spot for an A tier comp, it's gonna be oftentimes even better than a mediocre start for one of the S tiers. So keep that in mind as you're reading through this, but I do think the S is like slightly better, but not as much as some of the other weeks. In the A tier, we have Ambushers, Rebel Zoe. I think these two comps are great. They both got buffs in the recent patch. Ambushers, Camille's a bit stronger. I don't think you want to do like a dedicated Camille reroll, but the option is there if it comes up. Also, the Chem Baron version is very popular right now. We'll go over that in a bit. Rebel Zoe, solid comp, nothing too crazy there. They did get a small buff to Jinx in terms of like the Rebel units. So if you get Rebel Emblem early or anything like that, definitely go for this comp. Family, I think Family is really good, especially if you are like below Masters. Family is going to be one of the better comps to play. Combine it with a lot of the Pit Fighters. Pit Fighter Vertical is really good right now. Experiment Twitch, solid comp. Same with the Bruiser Mundo. They're kind of twin comps. But if you get one of the emblems, it's going to be great. If you get Rageblade, it's going to be great. Enforcers, solid comp. Again, it's just one of those emblem comps. Same with all these other ones. Conqueror, Scrap, Dominator, things like that. If you get the emblem, the comp becomes infinitely better. Zeri reroll, Form Swappers, and then Urgot reroll or Tristana reroll, Tristana Sentinels. All these are pretty viable as well, but I think the top row is what you're mainly after. I think the cutoff is like everything before Conqueror, like all these comps pretty close together. And then we have the A minuses down here. In terms of the weird comps or the very situational comps, we have Gloves Off Vander, Crimson Pack Vladimir, Reunion, and Built Different. I think these are all very, very powerful. And after that, let's get on into the comps. I think this is what everyone is always waiting for. In the S tier, we're starting off with Corki Heimerdinger. This is a Sentinel or Academy-based comp, depending on what you get. And again, I've said this before, but what I love about this comp so much is that you get a balance of AD, AP, and tank items in this build with late game potential with like Jace and Rumble. Combine them all together. You can combine both these versions too. Many other versions of this comp exist also, and you're always going to have someone to use your items. And the units are also pretty good. The only con about this comp is that they use pretty specific items, only Heimerdinger really uses specific items. He really likes the blue buff. After that, like Archangels is really good on him. Third item doesn't matter as much, but Corki, he uses pretty generic items, i.e. Last Whisper. So if you ever get i.e. Last Whisper early, get a bunch of tiers, you could definitely consider going into this comp. For augments, for me, I like getting one econ augment for this comp, maybe one of the leveling ones such as Slammin, Epic, any of those things. And then ideally one emblem, maybe like a Sentinel emblem or an Academy emblem works pretty well. But honestly, just generic combat augments work too. You're not like too tied down by certain augments or anything like that. But as for leveling, standard fast 8 as you do with all the other 4-cost comps, and yeah, that's that. We've went over this comp pretty much every single tier list video, so I think no one needs too much of an introduction to this. But if you do need more info, the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta is always open to you. So I highly recommend bookmarking that page, visiting it often, maybe pulling it up while you're playing a game to help yourself out and also to help me out too. Next one up we have is Emissary Sorcerer. We're running 4 Emissary, 4 Sorcerer, but if you do get a Sorcerer emblem, you could definitely run 6, nothing against that. The items on Swain are pretty static. This is like the 3 item combo that most people go for. By the way, if you're ever curious on what items to go for whenever you're playing TFT, head on over to like the data explorer page on like all the comp sections, or just go directly teamfight.lol, throw in whatever parameters you want, and then you can check out like items on Swain. Like people generally just use these 3. It's really, really powerful. Like surprisingly, Nashor's isn't used as much as the other ones, but definitely is still viable. It's just that this item combo works really, really well because 1, you need a mana item, 2, crit is really good with Sorcerer buff because you get so much ability power, and then lastly, get some damage amp with a guard breaker, and Swain damages a lot of units at once, so one of them's bound to have a shield, so you get the after damaging shield effect that powers him up even more. But the leveling pattern for this comp is a little bit different. You want to focus around your 3 cost units early on, play some sort of Sorcerer build, and sometimes when you do a 3 cost reroll, you need to stabilize on level 6. A bit counterintuitive because the best level to roll for 3 cost units is going to be level 7, but early in the game, you don't want to lose like all your stage 3 rounds. So that's why some people, when they have to, if they're really low life, they roll a little bit on stage 3 too, just to get Swain upgraded, or maybe some of the other units upgraded, maybe Vladimir, to hold you through stage 3, and then they econ back up to level 7 and then do the typical 3 cost reroll leveling pattern. So keep that in mind when you are playing this, because it's pretty much just what you need to do sometimes in order to not die before you get your comp going. Another thing to keep in mind with this comp is that you absolutely need to be uncontested, and a lot of other people, they play Swain as like a unit in their build, not necessarily because they're going for Swain 3, but oftentimes it's going to be because they're just playing Sorcerer, or they're just playing Form Swapper, or they're just using him as a temporary unit because they happen to hit him during the game. Those players are fine, like they're going to exist in every one of your games, but make sure no one else is actually re-rolling for Swain 3. So if someone looks like they're doing it and maybe they have Pandora's Bench, which is a great reroll augment, and maybe you don't, you might have to think about going into some sort of other AP comp. Luckily, there are a few of them right now. We'll probably cover them in just a bit. But next comp up, we have his Quickstriker reroll. A lot of people, they like the Twisted Fate one. I think the Nocturne one's a little more reliable, but both of them are very good options. It depends what items you get. So if you get a lot of artifact items, you want to go the Nocturne version. If you don't get that, but you get a lot of Quickstrikers, go for the Sentinel version, where you go Akali and Twisted Fate. Nocturne is pretty useless without artifact items, so unless you get him for free, I wouldn't really recommend playing him without it. For 2 cost reroll, it's a lot easier to play than 3 cost reroll because you're rolling at level 6 a lot anyway, so that little roll down you do in stage 3, you're probably going to do anyways, and it's at the most optimal level, so it's pretty easy to play 2 cost reroll. It might be one of the easier comps in the game. I think it's actually easier than 1 cost reroll, in some cases at least. But if you ever start the game with a +1 range artifact item and like 1-star Nocturne, like just hard force this comp, you will not regret it. Even if you have no copies of Nocturne, I've seen people make it work. Next build up, we have his Blackrose Flex, and this is going to be one of the premier comps right now because like backline Elise, it is viable. Like I've seen it in action. It's not crazy OP or anything, but it doesn't suck. Not that it sucked before, like it was always used as a temporary measure before, but now it's a better temporary measure, and you don't always have to put Elise in the front line anymore. So I think that change was actually pretty welcome because you don't want it to be too OP where everyone's going Elise, throwing her in the back line, and getting Elise 2-star, I'm telling you all, it's like pretty impossible right now. If we look at champions and 4 costs, we don't even have to look at 4 costs, just look at play rate. She's by far the most popular champion, not even close. It goes from 3.2 to 2.2. So yeah, she's just by far the most popular champion, and it's going to be pretty hard to 2-star her. So I'm glad that she's not super OP because the one lucky person that does gets her, throws her backline, and throws a birthday party for themselves. Like, no, that's not good, right? So I'm glad that they just buffed her up a little bit just to give people a little more options. For Blackrose Flex, you generally want to go Sorcerers, but you could also go Visionary, you could also go Dominators, and you could also just play with Elise. get into the legendaries and use those to carry later on. Like, I know in some of these images we don't have items on LeBlanc, but generally later on, like Malzahar and LeBlanc, you want to be dropping some items on them because you want to play around your legendaries. Like Jace, same thing. But this comp can honestly use pretty much any legendary. If we take a look at one of the random ones right now and type in like the legendaries here, like can't really use Caitlyn, but you could use Jace, not Jinx. You could use LeBlanc. Well, she's the best one because she's a Blackrose, right? You could use Malzahar. You could use Mordekaiser with Dominators, and Rumble might be fittable somehow. I don't really use him when I play Blackrose, but he does use some of your items pretty well. And then Savika, you don't really use. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 options there out of the 8 that we have. So lots of good options for legendaries. You're pretty much never without one. With that in mind, like you could fast 8, fast 9, both of these are good. I think this comp works really well with the fast 9. The reason why is because most flex comps are able to do that. Because you're not going for a specific level 8 board, you're just kind of going to level 8, rolling down, hitting some 4-cost units hopefully, and whatever you hit is what you hit, right? You're not specifically going for only the top version. You could hit any of the other versions of the Blackrose comp, and then you use that to go to level 9. What that means is you have a lot more gold to play around with because you're not tunnel visioning on any certain units, so you're just playing plus 30 gold compared to the people who are hard forcing rebels, for example. Because in a fair world, you don't have to roll as much to hit a decent board. That's why going 9 is super important when you play this comp, and hopefully you're able to get there. It does take a little bit more skill, like most fast 9 comps are a little more difficult to execute, but once you get a few reps in of the comp, you'll be able to play it for the rest of the patch. Next one up we have is Emissary. Emissary is a pretty cool comp. I like the first version the most. This is the one with tons of trades, so if you ever get bronze or life, just snipe it right away, grab it, and play this comp. But it is expensive. Despite not having any legendaries, you need 4-cost units, and of course you need specific emissary units. So if you do not get Garen or Ambessa, you pretty much just lose the game. So make sure you have a ton of gold to roll with at level 8. You don't have to do it all at once. Like you could roll 30 at one point and 30 at another point, but probably you want around like 60 gold to roll with at this stage, just to make sure you get a couple of the upgrades and of course get all the emissary units. After that, go level 9, add in the 9th unit. Normally when I play this, I take out either Gangplank or Twisted Fate or Vi, depending on who my upgrades are. I always want to put in traits that activate with my upgraded unit. So if I have Ambessa upgraded, I definitely need to keep my Twisted Fate because she's getting Quickstriker from that. And let's say I don't have Corki upgraded, like I have Ambessa 2, Corki 1, maybe you don't need the Gangplank, right? He's just giving scrap. Maybe I don't even have the scrap component. So I save Gangplank on my bench, get to level 9, then drop him in later. That's kind of how you balance the extra unit slot before you get to level 9. This comp also works really well with Rumble. So if you do end up getting a legendary, you could easily switch to this comp. You just take out 3 units and replace them with Vladimir, Rumble, and Rel. That's going to be the Swain, Vi, and the Gangplank. Pretty simple swap, and you only do it if you get Rumble. Preferably 2-star Rumble. In the super late game, I think this comp obviously might be a little bit better if you do have items for your Rumble, but if he's 1-star or if he's 2-star without the best items, then I think this version works out pretty well. Next build up we have is going to be Sorcerer Zoe, another typical fast 8 comp. This one, I like playing it with the emblem. I wouldn't really play it without it unless I get LeBlanc for free. So if I'm in stage 4, I'm flexing between a few comps, do a roll down, and I just see LeBlanc in my shop and I have some AP items, then yeah, maybe I'll just go for Sorcerer even without the emblem. But if that's not the case, like I'd probably only play this with the emblem. I'd probably go AP flex, see if I have some of the Blackrose variants, maybe go Dominators. But if I do end up getting the Sorcerer emblem somehow, then yeah, go for this 6 Sorcerer comp. Very, very powerful. I'd say Zoe main carry because oftentimes you don't get your LeBlanc yet until much later because you're really just looking for 1 legendary unit instead of 4 like one of the other comps we saw earlier. So I think it's a little more consistent playing around your Zoe, but of course if you do get an early LeBlanc, definitely play around her. Morello is probably my favorite item for her, but as with most mages or caster units in general that deal AP damage, getting a Spear of Shojin or a blue buff on them, in this case it's going to be Spear of Shojin, is pretty much mandatory to get them to cast pretty often. Next up we have is going to be Ambushers. So Ambushers are a pretty good comp right now. We're going to go over the Smeech variant, which is with Chem Baron. You could also do like the typical Ambusher board as well, but the Chem Baron one is a little bit more fun. You don't need to start stacking right away or get like crazy Chem Baron stacks, because you really just need a 300 cash out. You could even get away with 200 or 100 if you get a very specific payout. What you're looking for is going to be the Smeech payout. That way you get Smeech 3-star very, very easily. And you also get a nice little item for him or Rennie. So normally with reroll comps, it's pretty difficult to get the 3-star 3 costs. But again, because of the Chem Baron cash outs, it's pretty easy to get Smeech, and you also go for Rennie. Just throw any tank items on Rennie, and then you could secondary carry your Echo. But pretty much just go level 7, try to lose streak early game to get the stacks, but you don't have to like grief so hard because you're not going for like a 500 cash out. But obviously you do want to start stacking the Chem Baron pretty early. Next build up, we have his Rebel Zoe. I really need to change the name of this. It's mainly Rebel Jinx. Jinx is the one that matters, right? Let's look at the emblem version over here. With Jinx, you just need a lot of attack speed on her, same for Zoe. And I personally really like Spirit Shojin. Helps them cast faster because you just want to get as many super mega death rockets, is what I think is called, from Jinx, because that wipes everyone's board. And I also like the red buff so they can't heal back up in case you don't one tap them with your first rocket. In the front line, it's just Alawi. Alawi's pretty much the only thing that matters on your board apart from Jinx and Zoe. Like, yeah, the other units, they're still doing stuff. I'm not saying they're not doing anything, but in terms of tankiness, Alawi is your main person. One of the main requirements before playing this comp though is of course win streaking, because you need one specific legendary in the late game, or not even, you need it earlier than the late game, you need it in the mid game. But a Jinx 1 definitely does stabilize your board in stage 4 and stage 5, but getting that Jinx 2 is really what's going to set your team apart. This is pretty much like a 1st or 8th comp, so unless you get Rebel Emblem and have a lot of health so that you could find your Jinx at a somewhat decent time before you die, those are going to be the only 2 things that matter. Next build up, we have his family. This used to be my favorite comp, especially in the early parts of the set. It's just so fun to do this type of reroll. You just spam all the 1-cost units, and I don't know, for me it's just fun to play 1-cost reroll. But pit fighters are actually very solid right now. Like, if we check the data for pit fighters, I haven't even checked it yet, but I know from last patch that it was pretty decent, and we can check it out right now. If we type in pit fighter over here, you'll see that 6 pit fighter is 3.63, 8 pit fighter 2.45. Like, obviously you're not going to get to 8, and there's a lot of assumptions in this data. Like, if you can afford to get to 6 pit fighter when you're playing family reroll, it means you're able to get to a high level. So it already cancels out all the games where you die before stage 5. So obviously data's not always that honest, right? But if you ever get like a +1 pit fighter emblem, you don't even need Savika to get to 6 pit fighter. And your Violet just gets so many stats that she just goes absolutely nuts on everyone. Like if we take a look here, 6 pit fighter, it gives you 55% health shield. They gain a 55% healing buff once they reach the 50% threshold, and that's a lot of health on a 3-star, potentially 4-star unit. Combine that with Sterix, Bloodthirster, which both work on percent health, and add a Titan's Resolve for some resistances. Like, your Violet's gonna be smashing through a lot of teams. Also, another thing that people really like doing is putting artifact items onto your Violet. So if you're in the early game, you go for artifact items. Think of 2 builds, the family build and the Quickstriker build. Obviously, I think Quickstriker is better. That's why they're in the S tier and families in the A tier, but both options definitely do exist. Next build up we have is going to be Experiment Twitch. Twitch, like, we'll combine both of these. Bruiser Mundo and Experiment Twitch. They're just 2 Twitch builds, right? They're the most viable ones or the most simple ones to play. And you essentially just want Rageblade IE on Twitch. I personally really like Red Buff. That's probably my favorite item on Twitch. But Rageblade is mandatory, IE pretty mandatory as well. And you could go either 5 Experiment or go for 6 Bruisers. You just need some frontline for Twitch so that he can build up Rageblade stacks. After that, make sure you have 2 Sniper active and just some semblance of a frontline. Mundo's going to be the main tank in both cases. Just throw generic tank items on him. I like going for the full-on tank items, not the utility tank items, but if you happen to have them, like, it is what it is, just put them on your Mundo. We don't get perfect options in our items every single game, but your Twitch is going to be doing a lot of work from the back line. He hits multiple targets, so stuff like Dragon Soul, one of the anomalies, that's probably his best one, where he gets a lot of bonus damage from percent max health whenever he hits a target for the first time. That's going to be absolutely insane on someone who is going to be hitting different targets after every auto whenever he ults. So there are a lot of like very high roll scenarios for Twitch. I personally like him a lot, and not a lot of people go for him because it's a weird build. He's not the best unit overall, but he's solid enough that if you do end up hitting him, or if you get one of the emblems for this comp early on in the game, you're going to be doing really, really well. He's just not as mainstream as a Corki. But again, just standard leveling for both of these. Like the Bruiser's so broken. Like, wow. Mundo just gets so much health. It's like the match made in heaven. Mundo, with all his abilities and stuff that scale off of health, and then get the Bruiser emblem, which increases health. It's very hard to kill this guy. And In the Bruiser one, I do like getting the anomaly on the Mundo more so than the Twitch, but I also don't like to spend too much gold on my anomaly whenever I play these types of builds where I go for 4 costs. Next build up, we have our Enforcers. Enforcer's pretty solid. I only play this with the emblem. Some people say that 6 Enforcer is viable. I don't really like it. Like, you're allowed to do what you want to do, and if you really want to go 6 Enforcer because someone else said it's OP, like, be my guest. But for me, if I'm trying to win every game, I'd rather play other comps if I don't have an emblem, because whenever I go for more than 6 of a trait, I pretty much only do it with an emblem. It's just too risky otherwise, and you have to really be a master at that comp in order to fully execute it. So whenever I do verticals, I just avoid them unless I get their specific emblem. But if I do, like, I definitely hard force it after that point, right? And that's because I have to play like a lot of different comps, because I like make TFT videos on a variety of different comps, whereas someone else, they might only have to focus on 1 or 2 comps. So they just spam Enforcers every single game. They know everything around playing 6 Enforcer without the emblem, and they're able to climb incredible amounts like that. Both playstyles are viable. A lot of people ask me, should I force 1 comp or should I learn a few or learn all of them? It really depends on what you want to get out of the game. Like, if you want to climb super high, all playstyles work. It's just how well you actually practice it and master it. That's really all that matters. But this build, it's a little high rolly, I'd say. Not as high rolly as the Rebel comp, because you do have a lot more stabilizers in this build, especially if you have the emblem, because you could use a lot of different secondary carries. Like most people in the Rebel comp, it's really just a Jinx comp, right? So it's really hit or miss whether you hit Jinx or not. In this comp, like, yeah, Caitlyn's very good. No one's saying Caitlyn's bad, but she doesn't give that infinite boom that Jinx does. So while she is important, you can still use other units with the emblem to carry with and kind of use as an item holder before you get Caitlyn. And it's actually somewhat manageable. But pretty much backline items on Caitlyn, Bruiser items on Vi, tank items on whoever. I think tank items aren't actually that important in this build, but you do want like a little bit of tankiness because you don't have a true tank. I like running Alawi in this build sometimes over Ambessa. It really depends on what you're hitting. Like these extra units, Ambessa is pretty flexible. You could pretty much use any 4 or 5 cost unit that shares a trait with one of the Enforcers, and you'll probably be doing just fine. Next build up we have is going to be Conqueror. This comp got a pretty big buff, so I'm pretty excited. I haven't been able to play this comp yet, but I think last patch 6 Conqueror was averaging like a 4.6. Now it's averaging a 4.3, which means the buffs really did help it out a lot. But is that going to make you play 6 Conqueror more? Maybe a little bit more, but not that much more, right? Because you only play Conqueror if you can win streak, because Conquerors only work if you win streak. So unless you get a godlike Conqueror start, you're not going for the comp anyways, and you're not taking advantage of the improved stats, right? So my recommendation with Conqueror is nothing's changed. Play it if you have a good spot for it. If you don't even touch the comp, because it's just not worth it, because you need a win streak with it in order to make it work. So unless you start the game with 2-star Darius, 2-star Draven, I wouldn't really play this at all. But when I do get those games, I've won a lot of them. I think this entire set I played maybe 5 Conqueror games, and I think I won like 3 of them. And I think I got like first place in 3 of them. The other 2, I think I did badly in 1 of them, and then the other one was maybe like a 3rd or 4th or something like that. But the point is, if you get the right spots for Conqueror, it doesn't matter what the stats say, it's going to be very, very good. And if you play it in the wrong spots, again, doesn't matter what the stats say, it's going to be pretty bad. Next build up we have is Scrap Corki. Scrap is kind of not in the dumpster, but it's not a go-to main comp. It's definitely a good backup comp. Like, if you haven't noticed a pattern yet, Corki's really good in the Heimerdinger Sentinel comp, which is one of the better comps right now. But if you don't get that, you could always play Scrap as well if you are playing around the Corki, or if you get something like a Scrap emblem. It's still a viable build. It's just not as OP as it once was before, but definitely still playable. Don't sleep on this comp. It's very viable. And if you have a fast state augment and you get a lot of Scrap units, maybe an early rumble, like definitely still consider this comp, but I prefer playing the Sentinel version with Corki. But again, if you get Scrap emblem or any of the Scrap augments, just go for this. You won't really regret it that much. Next build up we have is going to be Dominators. Dominators just aren't the best AP line right now. It's probably one of the worst 4-cost APs because you play around Silco. If you get Mordekaiser, the comp becomes infinitely more online, but that relies on hitting a legendary, which I don't like planning my life around. So unless you hit the early Mordekaiser, or unless you have an early Dominator emblem that you're able to win streak with, I don't really like playing this build that much right now. But if you do meet those requirements, either win streaking early or getting an early Mordekaiser, then I'd say it's viable. But it's not my first choice of a comp, but decent fast aid, decent if you have AP items, and If you hit Silco 2, you hit Silco 2. Maybe you wanted a Zoe, maybe you wanted a Heimerdinger, but too bad you got Silco this game. You got to make do, and you'll get decent results as long as you fast 9 and then play around the legendaries after that. But again, that revolves around like win streaking and things like that. Zeri reroll, seen better days, honestly. Form swappers, you probably don't play that much. I do want to go over the Sentinel Tristana build. It's pretty solid. It's one of the few viable 2-cost rerolls. It's like Nocturne, this, and there's one other comp, I forget which. We went over it though. But it's pretty simple. You just play tanks and then play a Tristana 3-star. So your tanks can either be 3-star Rel, 3-star Leona, or a 2-star Alawi. I mean, I don't mind a 3-star Alawi either, but that's pretty rare to get, right? But then in the backline, you just play Tristana plus another Artillerist. Corki is going to be a popular option because he's a 4-cost unit, he's expensive, and you can pair it up with your Rumble. And in this build, you just need to make sure you get a Rage Blade on Tristana. You run 6 tanks, so you have a lot of time for Tristana to build up stacks, so it makes a lot of sense to drop a Rage Blade on her. Rage Blade is pretty much only good on comps with a lot of tanks, and this is one of them. After that, Hextech Gunblade is really good with scaling items because percent healing works really well if you deal a lot of damage. That's why these 2 items often get paired up. Like when you play Kogmaw, like you get the Rage Blade, Archangels, and a Hextech Gunblade. Like that's a very common Kogmaw build, right? The reason why is because there's a lot of scaling and that makes the percent healing much more effective. After that, Infinity Edge is really good because Tristana does rely on her spell cast a lot of times, so really nice stuff there. But overall, it's a pretty decent comp and you definitely should try it out. But the big question still remains, how am I going to be approaching the patch? Not too differently from last patch. Like if I get an emblem comp, and there's more than just these emblem comps, right? We went over like so many of them. I'm just gonna hard force it. Like I think Bruiser Mundo has been one of my go-tos pretty much every patch of this set because that combination is just really, really wild. After that, Sorcerers, a very strong contender. Ambushers, if you get a reroll opener, very nice. Enforcers, good if you get Enforcers. Some of the other ones are like Conqueror, Scrap, Dominator, Rebel. You could do Rebel as well. So it's not just limited to this list. I'm just giving out some examples. If you have AP items, and I'd say AD and AP right now are pretty equal. Maybe AP slightly stronger. It depends on what you're hitting. I think the super late game of AD is better, but the medium late game is better for AP. AP is a bit more flexible in that sense, I think, but any of the Blackrose flex stuff or any of the Sorcerer comps you're going to be doing fine with for AP. For AD, Corki and Twitch, those are pretty much your 2 options, and that's that. But of course, if you want to check out everything there is to know about this patch, head on over to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta. Let me know your favorite comps down in the comments below. And also, I did change my mic settings a bit. Someone was giving me some tips in the YouTube comments from before, so let me know if like this version is better than the ones from the weeks before, because I did change something slightly, but I won't tell you what it was. I want to know if it actually is better or not. Hopefully you don't even notice and it's just like the same thing you heard before, but without any of the issues that some audio files kind of heard. But that's gonna be it from me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.